Despite being one of the most iconic spaceships in film history, the Nostromo from Alien is also one of the most underrated. Let's take a look at the design, specifications, and history of this fascinating ship. I'm Joey from Radio Free Coruscant, and this is the USCSS Nostromo. Design. The Nostromo was a modified Lockmark CM-88B Bison M-class starfighter. It had a long, tapering main hull flanked by two enormous Rolls-Royce N66 Cyclone thrust tunnel engines, which replaced the CM-88B's original Saturn J3000s. Each of these had two large, downward-angled landing thrusters attached, one at the front and one in the middle. The rear of the ship held its three thruster clusters, protected by square heat shields. On top of the ship was its docking module, which enabled it to tow unfathomably large cargo loads, such as automated ore and oil refineries or other space stations. It is unclear if a stock Bison would have had one of these structures, or if this was added as part of the Nostromo's modifications. The Bison was originally a model of freighter, but the Nostromo was refit into a commercial tug, so this may have been added or reinforced as part of that process. The docking module featured a connector at the top and thrusters at the front and back. The nose of the Nostromo, like all Bison, held the ship's cockpit as well as a forest of antennae. The most prominent of these was its interstellar subspace antenna, which allowed it to communicate with its Weyland-Yutani Corporation owners from anywhere in the galaxy. There were several other antenna masts, a dish, and a docking tube on the front of the ship as well. On the bottom, the Nostromo had several landing sensor masts, its rugged landing gear, additional takeoff and landing thrusters, and a series of powerful retractable landing lights. It also had two docking ports for its escape shuttles on the engine nacelle pylons. Despite its large size, the Nostromo only had 3 habitable decks. The upper deck was the crew deck, with its main living areas, crew quarters, bridge, mess hall, science lab, medical bay, and hypersleep chamber. This is where most of the crew spent most of their time. The upper deck also had a chamber to access the ship's computer, a MUTH-UR 6000 AI mainframe, referred to as Mother by the crew. The lower decks were a lot less comfortable, containing the ship's engineering facilities and 4 enormous cargo holds. The bottom deck also had maintenance access for the ship's landing gear, which were exposed to the elements on landing and tended to accumulate condensation when landing in wet environments, such as LV-426. Somewhere in the ship, probably connected to the middle deck, was its colossal reactor powering the Yutani T-7A NLS tachyon shunt hyperdrive. This, according to most sources that bother to explain it, accelerates the ship faster than light by converting its real matter, which cannot exceed the speed of light per the laws of physics, into tachyons, a hypothetical particle that cannot move slower than light. This results in an interesting reverse time dilation effect that I don't think I have ever seen in any other sci-fi franchise, where instead of a faster-than-light ship experiencing only a fraction of the time that passes in the outside world, a ship in the Alien universe traveling faster than light experiences years of time inside while only a few months pass outside. This necessitates the use of the iconic hypersleep pods seen in most Alien media. The Nostromo was designed and built by Lockmart Industries, also known as Lockheed Martin, presumably a subsidiary of Weyland-Yutani. In real life, as far as I can tell, the ship was designed by a team of people including Chris Foss, Ron Cobb, Brian Johnson, and Ridley Scott. The final design seen in the film was made by Johnson, using a combination of elements from several of Cobb's concept drawings, at least according to an interview with Cobb from Starburst magazine in 1979. The 3D model of the Nostromo I am using throughout this video was created by Chris Cohn with a custom texture and lighting by me. Specifications. Information about the ships in the Alien franchise is not quite as comprehensive as that of the Star Wars ships I normally cover, but we do know a good bit about the Nostromo. She was simultaneously deceptively large and deceptively small. Many viewers not paying enough attention believe that this whole thing is the Nostromo, but that is, in fact, the ore refinery the Nostromo was hauling at the time. The Nostromo itself is this relatively tiny portion that undocks to land on the surface of LV-426 in the film. However, relatively tiny in this case is still enormous. The Nostromo is roughly the length of a modern aircraft carrier and almost 3 times as wide. In comparison to other sci-fi franchises, it was a bit shorter and wider than the USS Voyager, or as long as a Nebulon-B plus a YT-1300, and many times wider. Specifically, it measured 334 meters long by 215 meters wide and 98 meters tall, or 1,095 by 705 by 320 feet, with a mass of 63,000 metric tons. It had a top speed of 0.42 light-years per standard day unladen, or 0.12 LYSD fully loaded. This equates to 153 times the speed of light empty, or 44 times with cargo, if my math is correct. I was hoping to be able to convert that to a Star Wars hyperdrive rating for the sake of comparison, but I wasn't able to find a definitive speed for one of those. Estimates range from thousands to tens of thousands of light-years per day, so a ship traveling at 0.4 light-years per day probably wouldn't even register on the Star Wars scale. At best, it would probably be like a Class 1000 hyperdrive or worse. However, the Nostromo fits very nicely into the Star Trek speed scale, though, with its max speed equating to Warp 5 and its fully loaded speed Warp 3.5 on the original series scale. The later TNG scale isn't far off at the low end where the Nostromo sits, giving it a 4.5 or 3.1 speed there. Anyway, the Nostromo had a crew of 7, plus Jonesy the Cat. It was captained by Arthur Dallas, and crewed by Thomas Kane as Executive Officer, Ellen Ripley as Warrant Officer, Ash as Science Officer, Joan Lambert as Navigation Officer, Dennis Parker as Chief Engineer, and Samuel Brett as Engineering Technician. It does not seem to have any passenger capacity, unless there is a secondary hypersleep chamber elsewhere on the ship for them. Its cargo capacity is difficult to say. It has a total internal volume of 1.1 million cubic meters, but that seems to include all the habitable space, not just the cargo holds. It could tow stations at least as large as the Tesotek 2100B mineral and oil refinery. The mass of the refinery is unknown, but it had a cargo capacity of 20 million tons of ore, so the Nostromo probably had a towing capacity of 50 million total between the refinery, ore, and internally stored cargo on the Nostromo itself. On the subject of cargo, the Nostromo also carried a pair of Lockmart Star Cub light intrasystem shuttles, the Narcissus and the Salmacis. These measured 21.3 meters long by 16.2 meters wide and 7 meters tall, with a mass of 48 tons. They had a crew of 3 for ordinary sublight travel, a pilot, co-pilot, and science officer. They could be modified to add more seats if necessary, but each shuttle only had 2 hypersleep pods, so interstellar travel seriously reduced its capacity. The Nostromo kept 2 of these shuttles for emergency evacuation purposes, so one can only hope that any such emergencies occur within a short distance of an inhabited planet, space station, or busy shipping lane, otherwise the crew would have to take turns sleeping through the wait to be rescued. I suspect that these shuttles were also used for transportation purposes as well. Having the escape shuttles serve a secondary purpose ferrying supplies from a planet's surface to the ship, or transferring crew between ships and stations, could explain why Lockmart included 2 of these on the CM-88B rather than a proper emergency craft or something. Something I noticed about the shuttles when setting up the 3D model for the background footage is that the reported size of 21 meters long doesn't seem to actually fit in the space allocated to it on the Nostromo's hull. I checked the scene in the movie where Ripley escaped in the Narcissus, and as far as I can tell, Chris Cohn's depiction of the shuttle bay is the right size. And, checking the movie's finale, The reported size of the Narcissus appears accurate as well, considering the size of its interior and the size of the alien being launched out its airlock. So, unfortunately, it seems that either the stated size of the Nostromo itself is too small, or the filmmakers made the Narcissus set and miniature way too big. It would have to be almost half its actual size to fit in the Nostromo's shuttle ports. Finally, the Nostromo had a price tag of $42 million. Whether that includes the 2 shuttles or not is unknown, but either way, it is an unbelievable bargain. History. There is little to say about the history of the Nostromo before the incident depicted in the Alien film. It was constructed in 2101 as an interstellar freighter and refit 15 years later as a commercial towing vehicle. The ship made trips between Earth and the outer colonies, towing refineries back to Earth. A refinery would be loaded up with mineral ore in the colonies and then autonomously process it over the course of its journey back to Earth. The reverse time dilation of tachyon shunt travel meant that time for the refinery passed much more quickly than it would if the refinery were sitting still, meaning that it would arrive at Earth with the ore fully processed. In 2120, the Nostromo departed Earth on what would be its final voyage. It stopped at Neptune to pick up an empty Tesotek 2100B refinery a month later, which it was to deliver to the planet Thetis in the Epsilon Reticuli star system. This trip took 8 months. Then the crew had an 8-week layover at Thetis for the refinery to be loaded with ore, before departing for a nearly 2-year journey back to Earth due to the added weight of the ore. The shuttle Salmacis was damaged in a loading accident in orbit of Thetis and had to be left behind. The Nostromo's original science officer was replaced by Ash 2 days before leaving Thetis as well. At some point during the Nostromo's journey out or layover at Thetis, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation had detected an unknown warning signal from the planet LV-426 and diverted the Nostromo to investigate while its crew was in hypersleep on the journey back to Earth. They awoke on June 3, 2122, to discover they were not at Earth like they expected, but still 10 months away with instructions to investigate the signal. Upon landing, the Nostromo was damaged when large quantities of dust were sucked into its air intakes, causing them to overheat and sparking an electrical fire in the engineering section. Dallas, Kane, and Lambert left to investigate the source of the signal a few kilometers away, while the others stayed aboard the Nostromo to make repairs. Unfortunately, Kane was attacked and incapacitated by an alien parasite on the away mission, and when his colleagues returned to the ship with him, Science Officer Ash broke quarantine procedures by admitting Kane back aboard for medical treatment. Unbeknownst to the rest of the crew, Ash was actually a synthetic android planted by Weyland-Yutani to ensure the recovery of the alien organism. The company had been aware of a powerful and dangerous creature known as the Xenomorph for decades, and believed, correctly, that one would be found on LV-426, so they planted Ash as a sleeper agent to collect the organism by any means necessary. They issued Special Order 937 to him. Priority 1. Ensure return of organism for analysis. All other considerations secondary, crew expendable. After the Xenomorph was born and killed several of the crew, the remaining members decided the only course of action would be to abandon ship. The Xenomorph was lurking in the engineering section where the security cameras had been knocked out by the electrical fire, and Ash's betrayal was hindering their attempts to fight the creature. Unfortunately, only Ripley and the cat Jones survived to board the Narcissus, and witnessed the Nostromo's reactor detonate at the end of its emergency destruction sequence. Worse still, the Xenomorph got aboard the Narcissus while it was being fueled and loaded, but Ripley was able to don a spacesuit and eject it from the airlock before torching it in the shuttle's drive plume. She then set a course for civilization with the shuttle's tachyon shunt drive, and she and Jonesy went into stasis in its hypersleep pods to wait for rescue. They expected to be discovered in about 6 weeks when they reached the frontier. 15 years later, in 2137, the USCSS Anesidora discovered the Nostromo's flight data recorder while conducting salvage operations in the Zeta Reticuli system. They traveled to its last recorded position to attempt to recover the wreckage of the ship. However, they also discovered the warning beacon the Nostromo had investigated, and paid it a visit as well, inadvertently causing a xenomorph infestation at Sevastapol station when they traveled there for medical attention after encountering the derelict ship housing the xenomorph eggs. Ripley's daughter Amanda traveled to Sevastapol to claim the Nostromo's flight data recorder and find out what happened to her mother. She managed to view the data on the device and listen to a message from her mother, but the station was destroyed with the recorder on board due to the infestation. Amanda Ripley was left stranded in space much like her mother, but fortunately she was rescued after only 3 days. But fate was not yet done with the Nostromo. In 2142, the Echo 203 unmanned space probe discovered the wreckage of the Nostromo and its towed refinery. It detected a large organic mass, which it collected and brought to the Renaissance Research Station. Inside, scientists discovered the Nostromo xenomorph in hibernation. They experimented on it for a while, returned to the Nostromo wreckage to investigate further, and even tracked down the Narcissus with Ripley in hypersleep inside and brought it to Renaissance Station. However, for some reason they didn't awaken Ripley or even remove her cryopod from the shuttle. Perhaps they were concerned that she could be infected by the alien and wanted to wait until they could scan further, or perhaps they simply ran out of time because the xenomorph soon woke up and wrought havoc on the station, killing everyone on board and leaving it on a collision course with the rings of the planet the station was orbiting before being killed itself. A crew of scavengers boarded the doomed derelict station to steal hypersleep pods, inadvertently worsening the station's decline. In a stroke of unimaginable luck, though, this dislodged the Narcissus from the station's docking bay, sparing Ripley and Jonesy from being sandblasted into dust by the planet's rings like the rest of the station. The Narcissus would not be sighted again until 2179, a full 57 years after the destruction of the Nostromo. It was discovered by deep space salvage vessel GM-28223, whose crew brought Ripley and her cat to Gateway Station to recover from their excessively long period of stasis, finally bringing closure to the loss of the Nostromo by allowing its surviving crew member to correct the record on its disappearance. Unfortunately, the company would not believe Ripley's story until it sent her and a team of colonial marines to investigate the loss of a colony that had settled on LV-426 in the half-century since the Nostromo's fateful visit there, but that's another story for another ship. And that's everything there is to know about the USCSS Nostromo. Please let me know what you think of the Nostromo, and if you would like to see videos on any other ships from the Alien franchise. There are a lot of very cool ones, both famous and obscure, so I'd be happy to make some more if the demand is there. But thank you for watching this one, and I'll see you next week. This is Radio Free Coruscant, signing off.